I was 62 the Christmas morning my world shifted in ways I could never have imagined. Snow had fallen heavy through the night, blanketing the city in silence, the kind of silence that can feel both holy and haunting. I had risen early as I always did during the holidays, determined to bring some warmth to a house that had grown colder with the passing years. My husband had been gone nearly a decade, yet the ache of his absence lingered like frost that never quite melts. I baked pies, laid out coffee, tried to craft a sense of home in the cavernous spaces of my son's mansion, a place that glistened with wealth yet lacked the intimacy of love. My son Richard was a billionaire now, an empire builder with eyes that saw numbers where I once saw laughter. I remembered him as a boy running barefoot through our modest yard, cheeks red with joy, holding my hand tightly as if I were the whole world to him. But those memories had become ghosts in his eyes, eclipsed by boardrooms deals and a hunger that seemed insatiable. He was married now to Claire, a woman as polished as the glass chandeliers that sparkled above us, and yet as cold as the marble floors her heels clicked across. That morning, as the family gathered near the tree wrapping paper crinkling under eager hands, Richard turned to me suddenly. His voice was casual, almost mocking. "So, Mom, did you get your $8,000 allowance this month?" The words cut through the air sharper than any knife. For a moment I thought I had misheard. Allowance. $8,000. My heart stuttered in my chest as I looked at him, confusion painted across my face. "What allowance?" I asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. The room shifted. Claire's smile froze brittle as glass about to shatter. Richard's eyes flickered just for a second, betraying something he had not intended to reveal. And in that frozen moment, the world tilted. My son's empire had not been built on his brilliance alone. It had been built on lies, omissions, secrets buried in accounts I had never seen. Money that was supposed to be mine. Money my late husband had set aside for me. Money that Richard had taken, repackaged, and dripped back as though I were a child receiving an allowance instead of the rightful heir to my husband's legacy. I sat there, the sounds of laughter and tearing paper echoing around me like a cruel parody of joy. My granddaughter ran past with a doll, her giggle like a bell, yet even that sweetness could not pierce the ice forming in my chest. $8,000. To them it was a trivial sum, a token. To me it was the symbol of something far darker, betrayal from the very son I had carried, birthed, nurtured. My hands trembled as I set down my cup of coffee, my eyes fixed on Richard, searching for the boy I once knew. But he was gone. Later in the quiet, after the storm of wrapping paper and forced smiles, I wandered into one of the guest rooms, my heart heavy. I pressed my hands to the dresser, steadying myself, and let the tears come. Images of my husband flooded me, his laughter, his quiet wisdom, his way of always planning for the future. He had left money, yes, but more than that, he had left trust. Trust that Richard would protect me, honor me. And instead, my son had turned that trust into a leash. He had stripped me of dignity, made me dependent without my knowing, all while parading wealth that had roots in deceit. I thought of confronting him then and there, but something inside me stopped. Rage was loud, but silence was powerful. I decided in that moment that I would not scream, would not beg. I would watch, I would listen, I would dig. Because the truth was out there, hidden beneath the polished marble of their world, and I owed it to myself and to the memory of my husband to uncover it. The days after Christmas blurred into weeks. I returned to my smaller home, a modest cottage compared to the grand sprawl of Richard's estate. The snow melted, replaced by gray skies and rain, yet the chill remained in my bones. I began to search through old boxes, files my husband had left behind. In one worn leather folder tucked beneath tax forms and brittle photographs, I found something that made my breath catch. A ledger neatly written in my husband's hand, notes about investments accounts, and a trust, my trust. It was all there in black ink with my name written clear. I traced the letters with trembling fingers, my husband's handwriting pulling me back through time. He had thought of me, planned for me, safeguarded me. And Richard had taken it. The anger that welled inside me was like nothing I had ever known. It wasn't the quick spark of frustration, It was a slow, smoldering fire that burned hotter each day. I thought of all the times Richard had dismissed me, spoken over me, made decisions as though I were a fragile relic instead of his mother. I thought of Claire's cold smile, the way she looked at me, as though I were an obligation rather than family. And now, knowing they had built their empire with money stolen from me, it was almost unbearable. But grief and rage are powerful teachers. They taught me patience. They taught me caution. I knew I could not confront them without proof, without a plan. And so I dug deeper. I visited banks, asked quiet questions, traced signatures that matched my husband's. Each discovery cut deeper, but each also strengthened my resolve. This was not just about money. It was about truth. It was about reclaiming not only what was mine, but the dignity they had tried to strip away. Nights grew long and lonely. I often sat by the fire, the ledger open in my lap, hearing my husband's voice whisper in the crackle of the flames. "You are stronger than you think," he seemed to say, and I clung to that because strength was the only thing keeping me from drowning. By February, I had gathered enough to see the outlines of the scheme. Accounts rerouted, trust funds altered, my name hidden behind legal jargon and paper shields. Richard had been siphoning for years, keeping me blind with carefully crafted illusions. And every month the $8,000 arrived, a cruel reminder of my dependence. One evening, as the rain lashed against the windows, I picked up the phone. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady when I spoke to my lawyer. I told him everything. I sent copies of the ledger, the statements, the proof. His silence on the other end told me more than words could. This was bigger than I had even imagined. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, serious. "We'll need to move carefully," he said. "But you have more power here than you think." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my cottage, the fire flickering low. My heart ached, not only with anger, but with sorrow. Because beneath all the betrayal, beneath the lies and the greed, there was still the memory of a little boy who once clung to me, who once believed I was his world. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who valued power over love. And yet, I could not kill the part of me that still longed for him to remember who he was. But longing could not protect me. Only truth could. And so I prepared for what was to come, not knowing that the deeper I dug, the more secrets I would unearth. Secrets not only about money, but about Claire, about Richard's empire, about betrayals that ran even deeper than I had feared. The days that followed my conversation with the lawyer stretched out like a taut wire, humming with tension I could feel in my bones. Every ring of the phone startled me, every knock at the door set my heart racing. It wasn't fear alone, it was anticipation. I had uncovered just enough truth to know my son had betrayed me, but not yet enough to confront him without risk. The ledger burned in my mind like a brand. My husband had written those numbers with his own steady hand, and those numbers told a story that could no longer be ignored. Richard called one evening, his voice warm, almost too warm, the way a man speaks when he is covering something. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking we should meet for lunch. Just the two of us. There are some things I want to explain." Explain! My stomach tightened at the word. Was this guilt? Or was this strategy? I agreed because silence had its limits, and sometimes the only way to learn the truth is to look a liar in the eye. The restaurant he chose was one of his favorites, a place where the floors gleamed and the waiters spoke in hushed tones, where money seemed to hang in the air like perfume. I arrived early, sitting at the table with my hands folded, rehearsing the questions I might ask. When Richard walked in, tall, confident, dressed in the sharp suit of a man who had built an empire, I felt that old sting of pride mixed with grief. He was my son, my boy, and yet so far from the child I once knew. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and sat down. "Mom," he began, "I don't want you to worry. You're taken care of. You'll always be taken care of." The words landed like stones. Taken care of, as though I were a pet, as though my life, my autonomy had been reduced to his generosity. I looked at him and asked carefully, "Where does the money come from, Richard?" "The $8,000. For a moment his mask slipped, his eyes flickered, his smile faltered. Then he laughed, brushing it off. It's just from some accounts Dad set up. Complicated stuff, nothing you need to worry about. Nothing I need to worry about. The phrase repeated in my mind, each word a slap. Did he not realize that I already knew, that I had the ledger, the proof? Or did he think I was too weak, too ignorant, too old to connect the dots? I didn't push. I let him think his performance had convinced me, because sometimes the most powerful weapon is letting someone underestimate you. That night, back in my cottage, I opened the ledger again, running my fingers over my husband's handwriting. Complicated stuff, Richard had said. But it wasn't complicated. It was theft, plain and simple. I began to notice more details than things I had once brushed aside. The expensive vacations Richard and Claire took, the new cars, the renovations on their already sprawling mansion. I thought of Claire's frozen smile that Christmas morning, the way she seemed startled when the word allowance slipped from Richard's lips. She had known. She had been complicit. The thought made me ill. This wasn't just betrayal by my son, it was betrayal by the family he had chosen, the family he prioritized over me. Weeks passed, and with each day my anger transformed into something sharper, more precise. I gathered documents, statements, anything that could support the truth. My lawyer guided me patiently, reminding me to keep quiet, to let Richard believe I was still blind. I hated the deception, but I understood its necessity. One evening, Emily came to visit. My sweet granddaughter with her wide eyes and gentle heart. She ran into my arms, her laughter softening the hardness that had grown inside me. We baked cookies together, and as the smell of sugar and butter filled the air, she asked innocently, "Grandma, why don't you live in Daddy's big house? There's so much room." I felt the sting of tears and forced a smile. Because, darling, sometimes a house is big, but it doesn't feel like home. She nodded, satisfied with the answer, though her words lingered with me long after she had gone to bed. That night, I wrote in my journal, "What legacy am I leaving for her? Will she grow up believing love is measured in dollars and allowances? Or will she know the truth that dignity, trust, and love cannot be bought or stolen?" The storm came sooner than I expected. It was late March when Richard called again, his tone harder now, the warmth stripped away. "Mom, I hear you've been asking questions. Banks, lawyers. Why don't you trust me?" The words shook me, though I had prepared for them. "Of course I trust you," I lied softly. "I was just organizing things. I wanted to understand." There was silence on the line, long and heavy. Then he said, "Don't go digging into things you don't understand. It'll only make trouble." Trouble. The threat was thinly veiled, but it was there. My own son warning me off like a stranger who had wandered too close to his secrets. I hung up the phone with my hands trembling, but my resolve stronger than ever. If he wanted me silent, then the truth was even more dangerous than I realized. That night, I dreamed of my husband. He was standing in the garden, roses blooming around him, his hands folded calmly behind his back. He looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "You must not let them take what is yours. Stand firm. You are stronger than you know." I woke with tears on my face, but also with fire in my chest. My husband's voice was clear even in death. I could not let this betrayal stand. The next day I went back to the lawyer with everything I had. Documents, statements, the ledger. He laid them out on his desk, his eyes scanning the lines quickly. When he looked up, his expression was grave. "This isn't just about your trust," he said. "There are shell accounts, offshore holdings. Richard has built an empire on foundations that don't belong to him." The words hit me like a wave. This wasn't just theft, it was corruption. My son wasn't only betraying me, he was betraying the very legacy his father had tried to protect. I walked home that day in the rain, each drop soaking me to the bone, but I felt strangely cleansed. The truth was heavier than I had feared, but it was also liberating. At least now I knew. At least now I could fight. As I closed the door of my cottage, the storm raging outside, I whispered to the empty room, "You thought you silenced me, Richard, but you've only awakened me." Spring crept in slowly, though, in my heart. The chill never lifted. The villa garden bloomed roses, pushing through the thaw lilacs, brushing the air with their fragrance. But even beauty felt sharp to me now, like glass that cut instead of soothed. I carried my husband's ledger with me almost everywhere, tucked into my bag, as though his handwriting were a shield against the storm that brewed inside my family. Richard's warning, "Don't go digging into things you don't understand," echoed in my ears day after day. Each time I thought of it, a shiver ran through me. I was his mother, the woman who gave him life, and yet he spoke to me as though I were an intruder, a trespasser in his empire of lies. But he was right about one thing. The more I dug, the more I uncovered, and the more dangerous the truth became. My lawyer revealed transactions that wound through offshore accounts, trusts shifted under names I didn't recognize, partnerships inked with men whose reputations carried shadows darker than I wanted to imagine. And yet at the center of it all, there it was my trust, my husband's legacy, the foundation on which Richard had built his kingdom. One night I sat at my desk, papers scattered across the surface, the fire crackling low in the hearth. I read line after line, signature after signature, and felt the weight of betrayal pressing on me like a stone. My son had not stumbled into this by mistake. He had orchestrated it. He had taken what was mine, repackaged it, and fed me scraps of it each month as though I were a child receiving allowance. I closed my eyes and tried to remember him as a boy. I saw him chasing butterflies in the yard, his hands sticky with ice cream, his laugh filling the summer air. I remembered the nights I sat at his bedside, wiping his fevered brow, whispering prayers into the darkness. How had that boy grown into this man? What had turned his heart so cold, so calculating? Was it greed? Was it the influence of Claire? Or had there always been a seed of hunger inside him, waiting for wealth to feed it? The questions haunted me, but the answers mattered less than the truth I held in my hands. This was bigger than disappointment. This was betrayal in its purest form. The first confrontation came quietly. Richard arrived at my cottage one evening without warning. His sleek car sat in my driveway like an omen, its black frame glistening under the fading light. When I opened the door, he stood there with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation, "we need to talk." He wandered through the cottage, his eyes scanning the modest furniture, the simple photos on the wall. "You could be living in so much more comfort," he said. "Why do you insist on clinging to this place, to smallness?" His words stung, but I steadied myself. "This isn't small, Richard. It's mine." He turned, his smile fading, his eyes sharpening. "I hear you've been asking questions. Lawyers, banks. Do you think that's wise?" I met his gaze, my heart pounding. "I think it's necessary." For a moment, the mask slipped again. His jaw tightened, his hand clenched into a fist at his side. Then just as quickly, he smoothed his expression. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mom. You're cared for. You're safe. Isn't that enough?" Safe. The word felt like a chain around my neck. "Safe," I repeated, my voice steady, "or silenced." His eyes narrowed. He said nothing more, only turned and left his footsteps echoing on the porch. But the threat lingered in the air long after his car disappeared down the road. That night I cried not for myself, but for the boy I had lost. Because whatever else Richard had become, my son was gone, and in his place stood a man I hardly recognized. The following weeks brought whispers. A neighbor told me Richard had spoken about moving me into his estate, as though the decision were already made. A cousin called confused, saying Richard mentioned I was being taken care of and no longer needed the cottage. Each word was a knife, each rumor proof that Richard was weaving a story about me without my consent, painting me as fragile and capable dependent. He was laying the groundwork for erasure, but he underestimated me. One afternoon, I met with my lawyer again. We spread the documents across his polished oak desk, maps of betrayal laid out in ink. He pointed to one account in particular. "This," he said, "is the linchpin. If we expose this, the entire scheme unravels. But it will be public, and it will be ugly. Are you prepared for that?" I looked down at my hands. They trembled not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. To go forward meant not only confronting Richard, but destroying the illusion of family forever. To stay silent meant living erased, dependent, broken. "I'm prepared," I whispered, though my heart cracked as I said it. The days leading to the legal filing were some of the longest of my life. I moved like a ghost through the cottage, tending to my garden, baking bread, sweeping floors all the while. knowing that soon the quiet life I clung to would shatter. I wrote letters to Emily, tucking them away in a drawer, words she might one day need to understand why her grandmother stood against her father. I poured into those pages every ounce of love, every drop of sorrow, every truth I could not yet speak aloud. The night before the filing, I dreamt again of my husband. He was standing in the rose garden, the same place where we had once celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, even ordinary Tuesdays. He looked at me with steady eyes and said, "You have already lost him, but you have not lost yourself. Do not let them take that too." I woke with tears on my cheeks, but also with clarity. Tomorrow I would no longer be silent. Tomorrow the truth would have a voice. And when the papers were filed, when the case was set into motion, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief because I knew this would tear my family apart. Relief because at last I was no longer carrying the weight alone. But nothing could prepare me for what happened next. Because when Richard realized I had moved against him, when he saw the fortress of lies he had built begin to crack, he didn't retreat. He struck back, and in striking back, he revealed secrets I had never imagined, secrets that went beyond money, beyond betrayal, into the very heart of who we were as a family. The first blow came in whispers. A friend of mine from church pulled me aside one Sunday, her voice hushed with concern. "I heard Richard's been saying you're not well," she murmured, eyes darting toward the others in the pews. "That you've been confused." The word hung in the air, thick with pity. Confused. My son had begun laying the foundation not only to strip me of my home, but of my very mind. I walked home under gray skies, the chill burrowing deep into my bones. Confused. The betrayal was cutting in new ways now, not with contracts or accounts, but with rumors that gnawed at the essence of who I was. He wanted not only my money, but my credibility, my identity. That evening the phone rang. My lawyer's voice was tense. "He's pushing back. He's filing motions challenging your competence to handle your own affairs. He's painting you as unfit." Unfit. The word burned. I clenched the receiver, my breath trembling. "He wants me erased," I whispered. "Yes," my lawyer replied gently. "But remember, we have proof. We have the ledger, the accounts. The truth is on your side." But even truth can be fragile in the face of power. And Richard had power. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and quiet dread. Each day I woke with the heavy knowledge that my own son was preparing to stand in court and declare me incapable. The boy I had once cradled now sought to make me invisible. One evening, while sorting through an old trunk of papers, I found something I had missed before, a letter from my husband tucked deep inside a folder of photographs. My hands shook as I unfolded it. His handwriting was steady, deliberate. "If you are reading this, it means Richard has chosen the path I feared. I saw in him a hunger I could not tame. Know this, you are stronger than his ambition. There is more set aside for you than he realizes. Look for the accounts in Lisbon. They are yours, untouched." Lisbon. My breath caught. My husband had left not just one trust, not just one secret, but more hidden away across the ocean. Richard had siphoned much, but not all. My husband's foresight stretched further than even I had known. The knowledge was both a balm and a burden. A balm because it meant Richard had not stolen everything. A burden because it meant revealing this would ignite a firestorm. When I next saw Richard, it was in a conference room, lawyers seated on either side, papers stacked between us like walls. He looked sharp, polished, but his eyes were cold, distant. Claire sat beside him, her smile thin and brittle. "Mom," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "this isn't what I wanted. You're making this harder than it needs to be. All I want is to make sure you're cared for." Cared for. I repeated, my voice steady, though my hands trembled beneath the table. "Or controlled." His jaw tightened. Claire's hand touched his arm, a silent signal. His lawyer slid papers forward, filled with words meant to reduce me to incompetence, to strip me of the right to decide my own life. But my lawyer slid papers, 2 documents of the trust, the ledger signatures that bore my husband's hand. The evidence of theft. Richard's mask cracked then for just a moment. His face flushed, his eyes flickered with panic. But then he leaned back, forcing a laugh. You don't understand the complexities, Mom. This is business. Dad trusted me to handle it. No, I said softly, my voice carrying across the room. Dad trusted you to protect me, and you betrayed that trust. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the boy he once was, the boy who had clung to me in the dark, who had once whispered he would always take care of me. But it vanished, swallowed by the man who now sat before me. The meeting ended in fury, his footsteps echoing as he stormed out, Claire trailing close behind. I sat there long after, my lawyer's hand resting gently on mine. This will get uglier, he warned. And it did. Rumors spread like wildfire. Friends avoided me, their eyes full of questions they didn't dare ask. The whispers grew louder about my memory, my health, my supposed instability. Richard was painting a portrait of me as a woman slipping into decline, unfit to handle her own affairs. It was cruel, calculated, and devastatingly effective. But I held my ground. Each night I lit a candle by my husband's photograph and whispered, I will not let him erase me. Then came the twist I never expected. One evening as I sat by the fire, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaky, hesitant. Mrs. Harris, a man asked. You don't know me, but I used to work for your son. I think you should know he's not just been taking from you. He's been moving money for others. Dangerous people. If this comes out, it won't just be about family. It could ruin him. It could ruin all of you. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about my trust or my money. Richard had entangled himself with people far beyond our family's reach. And if the truth surfaced, the fallout would be catastrophic. I hung up the phone, my heart racing, my hands trembling. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. My son wasn't just greedy, he was reckless. He had risked not only my future, but his daughter's, his wife's, his own legacy. I sat in the silence of my cottage, the fire flickering low, the shadows stretching long. And in that silence, I realized something with brutal clarity. I had thought this battle was about money. It wasn't. It was about survival, about truth, about saving what could still be saved from the ruins of betrayal. And when the storm finally broke, when the day came to step into the courtroom, I knew the battle would not only determine my future, it would determine the future of everything my husband and I had built. The morning of the trial arrived heavy with rain, the sky swollen with dark clouds that seemed to mirror the weight in my chest. I dressed slowly, my hands steady, despite the storm inside me. A simple black dress, the same one I had worn on the hardest days, felt like armor now. I whispered a prayer as I fastened the small silver brooch my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary. Be with me, I murmured to the silence, though in my heart, I already felt his presence. The courthouse loomed gray and unyielding, its stone steps slick with rain. Each step I climbed felt like a reckoning, the echo of my shoes against the stone a drumbeat of resolve. Inside, the air was thick with whispers. Family, neighbors, strangers, they had all come, drawn by the spectacle of a mother and son, torn apart not by strangers, but by betrayal. Richard sat at his table, sharp in a dark suit, Claire at his side, her eyes hard, her mouth set in a thin line. He didn't look at me, not once. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched, his gaze fixed on the judge as though I were already erased from his story. The proceedings began quickly. His lawyer rose first, his words smooth, practiced cutting. He painted me as frail, confused, incapable of managing my own affairs. He spoke of my erratic behavior, of my isolation, of the supposed danger of letting an elderly widow control assets of such size. His words landed like stones, each one chipping away at the person I knew myself to be. I sat still, my hands folded, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream, but I did not. Silence was my shield. Then my lawyer rose, his voice calm, deliberate, like steady hands mending a tear. He laid out the ledger, the documents, my husband's handwriting clear and undeniable. He spoke of the trust that had been siphoned, of the accounts hidden behind Richard's schemes. He reminded the court that independence is not weakness, that grief does not equal incompetence. He spoke of foresight, my husband's foresight that had left me not only provision but protection. Finally, it was my turn. The bailiff called me forward, and as I took the stand, The world seemed to narrow into the path before me. My hands trembled as I swore the oath, but when I lifted my eyes, they were steady. I am 62 years old. I began, my voice soft but clear. I built my life with my husband brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. When he died, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. But I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering that the son I carried, the boy I raised, no longer saw me as his mother, but as an obstacle to be removed. The courtroom was silent. I let the silence stretch, breathing into it, allowing the weight of my words to sink in. This case is not about money. It is not about houses or accounts. It is about trust. Trust that was broken, love that was twisted into control. My husband did not intend for me to live as a dependent, taking scraps as if I were a burden. He intended for me to live with dignity. And when my son took that from me, he didn't just steal money, he stole the bond between us. My voice cracked, then tears welling in my eyes, but I did not look away. I looked at Richard, at the boy I once rocked to sleep, the man who now sat rigid in anger. I loved you, I whispered, though only those nearest could hear. The judge asked questions. The lawyers bickered documents, shuffled like cards in a game no one wanted to play. Hours stretched long, the air heavy with tension. And then at last the judge spoke. Her voice was steady, unwavering. She acknowledged my husband's ledger, the accounts, the trust. She acknowledged Richard's mismanagement, his siphoning, his betrayal. And then with a single sentence she returned to me what was always mine: control of my trust, my home, my dignity. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber like thunder. The silence that followed was deafening. My son sat frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief, his lips trembling with words he could not form. Claire pressed her hand to her forehead, her face pale, her composure cracking. I rose slowly, my body shaking but my spirit unbowed. As I walked past Richard, he finally looked at me. His eyes were filled not with remorse, not with recognition, but with a hollow rage that pierced me deeper than any knife. And in that look I understood I had not only won my case, I had lost my son forever. Outside the storm had broken. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking my dress, clinging to my skin. But I didn't run for cover. I let the rain wash over me, baptizing me in truth and survival, in the knowledge that I had endured. Each drop felt like a cleansing, stripping away the lies, the whispers, the weight of betrayal. That night back in my cottage, I walked through each room slowly. I touched the photographs on the walls, the furniture worn with decades of love, the rosewood table my husband had polished with his own hands. For the first time in years, I felt peace. The house was mine, yes, but more than that, my voice was mine. My dignity was mine. My truth was mine. I sat by the fire, the flames dancing in the hearth, and opened my journal. I wrote to Emily, to the granddaughter who would one day need to know this story. The world will tell you that money is power. But it isn't. Truth is power. Love is power. And when betrayal comes, and it will, do not let it erase you. Stand firm. Speak. Endure. As the fire crackled and the storm eased outside, I realized the lesson I would carry for the rest of my days. Family can betray you. Love can twist into greed. But no one, not even your own blood, can erase the truth of who you are. So I tell you now, as if you were sitting across from me in this quiet room, if you have ever been broken, if you have ever been betrayed, know this: your voice still matters, your truth still matters, you are not erased. If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength in the face of betrayal, please like this video, share it so others may find courage, subscribe to the channel for more stories, and leave a comment below. Tell me how you endured when life turned against you, because in sharing, we heal together.